Hey guys, MetalJesus here, and today we're going to be taking a look at my entire Game Boy Advance collection. And I'll admit, I love this handheld system, especially when I got the Game Boy Advance SP. That was the very first one I got. I got the red one, it was backlit, it was compact, it was beautiful, and there were just so many good games for it. And I have over 150 games. However, as you'll see in this video, the way I store them is broken down into 3 separate ways. The first way being that I have a few, not many, complete in-box games. The second way is that I would take old Nintendo DS cases and then put my cartridge in there. So a lot of my collection's loose, and this is how I originally started storing these in my game collection. And that worked out great. However, recently in the last year, I've discovered the website miniboxgaming.com. And as you see here, they create smaller duplicates or replications of those original boxes that you would get, just smaller for people who have, like me, a mostly loose collection. And so I just want to clarify that's how these are stored in my game room, so you weren't confused. Now, there's no better place, in my opinion, to start when talking about the games for this handheld than starting with Nintendo themselves, because they released a ton of great stuff for this handheld for many reasons. I mean, obviously, it was just super popular, and the system would play almost, again, every genre that you threw at it. 3 big standouts for me here are Zelda Minish Cap. That's kind of a Zelda game that doesn't get a lot of love these days, but I enjoyed the heck out of that when I played it originally when it came out. Also, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga was a game that just cracked me up when I first played it. It's a fantastic RPG starring those 2 characters. I love the battle system in here, and like I said, the humor in it is just laugh out loud funny. As well as Advance Wars, another game that just really took me by surprise when I first got it. I played the heck out of that game. I love it. And Nintendo released some really fun games on here. I like how they would take chances with some new properties, but then also mix in some retro stuff in here. There's a lot of retro games that you could get in cartridge form for the Game Boy Advance, which I really appreciated. And there was even some wacky pinball games released on the Game Boy Advance. I think a lot of people kind of forget that these are official Nintendo releases, right? The Mario Pinball Land, which actually looks really cool, and it's a pretty fun game. And then, of course, you have the Pokemon Pinball as well. And that was just the era for pinball, right? It seemed like there was a lot of pinball games released at that time. Obviously not an official Nintendo release. However, I thought this is pretty cool. It's kind of a weird game called the Pinball of the Dead. Yes, the House of the Dead franchise, but in pinball form on the Game Boy Advance. I thought that was pretty cool. And this is going to be no surprise to you if you've been following my channel for a while, but my all-time favorite game on the Game Boy Advance is Metroid Zero Mission. I absolutely love that game when I first played it. I still go back and play it every couple of years. I just think it's a masterpiece. But of course, there is the other great, Metroid game on there called Metroid Fusion as well. And it's funny because people will debate which one they think is better. And I think it's just because I played Zero Mission first that's the one I tend to gravitate, towards. But I can definitely see the appeal of Fusion as well. They're both truly excellent. This was a time when there was a lot of collections that were released on the Game Boy Advance, and I really like getting these. So you see a bunch of kind of retro themed ones here for Activision. You see, Paperboy, Rampage. You see a Midway Classics version there, as well as Namco. This Konami one here I always really appreciated. And then you also got collections of games that were maybe newer. So you get these 2-in-1 double packs here, or sometimes you get some of these cartridges that might have 3 games on it. Just a really interesting time. And again, it makes it very nice because they're portable. So I pick these up any chance that I find them. I just think that they're really neat. And of course, I like racing games, and the Game Boy Advance had a ton of them. I'm sure this is only a fraction of them here, but this is my collection here. And what's really interesting about it is that the Game Boy Advance, as you guys know, isn't known for being a 3D powerhouse. However, Over the years, I've started to appreciate some of the games that really try to push the hardware and try to do true 3D racing games, and you see a few of them here. And I'm a firm believer that sometimes when hardware is limited, that's when game developers become the most creative. And again, you see that with a lot of these racing games here where, you know, they're taking chances a little bit here, trying to make these racing games fit onto this relatively, I wouldn't call it simple, I've never programmed for it, but, you know, underpowered handheld. And again, it's just really fun to see. You know, obviously the sacrifice is often its frame rate. So some of these racing games don't have great frame rates, but I still think it's pretty neat to see. The Tony Hawk franchise did something that I thought was pretty cool here, in that they didn't necessarily try to recreate the big console versions of their games. Instead, I think they utilized this older hardware in a really creative way where it went mostly isometric view, especially for the Pro Skater series, and I think it worked out pretty well. If you haven't played these versions of the games, they are surprisingly close and very fun if you're used to the version that you would play, you know, say on the PlayStation 2 or the Xbox, something like that. But then they did have Tony Hawk Downhill Jam, which is a 3D game on the Game Boy Advance. Probably not my favorite game in the franchise, but again, it's still pretty neat to see what they did with the hardware. And as you guys know, I love SSX Tricky on the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox. And here is another attempt to do kind of a 3D conversion to the Game Boy Advance. And I would say they mostly succeeded. Obviously, I would never play this over the actual real version of the game. But again, it's pretty neat to see what they're able to pull off on this simple handheld. The Castlevania franchise transitioned over to the Game Boy Advance extremely well. You see two of the games here that I have in my collection, and both of these are reviewed extremely well at the time. They're very well received. People were extremely excited to get them on there, and I love playing them as well. They really hold up even today. Although I'm looking at this and I'm realizing that I am missing the third one, which is Aria of Sorrow. I swear I had that in my collection, but for some reason I must have lost it. Anyway, so yeah, if you're a Castlevania fan, you'll love playing them on the GBA. All told, there were over 1,500 games released worldwide for the Game Boy Advance. So because of that, there is of course going to be a bunch of hidden gems released on this system. And so early on, I really started looking deep into this catalog to try to find stuff that is beyond, you know, the stuff that got the most exposure when it came to releases. And you see 6 of them here that I've covered on my channel probably 5 years ago or something like that. This is a bunch of hidden gems I've talked about for many, many years. And again, it's fun to dig into the back catalog of the system and try to find those games that are a little less known, including the CT Special Forces series. You see the first 2 of them right here. Now, admittedly, I have only recently discovered this franchise because of my buddy Reggie, who goes deep into, you know, when it comes to Game Boy Advance games. He told me about this franchise. It is a run and gun series, and it's mostly comparable to things sort of like Metal Slug, things like that. So if you like that kind of arcade run and gun action, you'll definitely dig these. I gotta have some RPGs on my handheld, and here are a few of them. Some standouts here for me specifically. I loved Final Fantasy Tactics when that first came out. I played that for months and months and months. I don't know how many hours my save game has on it, but it was a lot. I also really love the Golden Sun series. That's a really high quality franchise on the Game Boy Advance. Also, a bit of a hidden gem, at least a couple years ago, most people didn't know about Car Battler Joe. I really like this game because it's something a little bit different. And you guys know I'm into cars and racing games. Well, here is a car RPG kind of. So it's very traditional RPG elements here where you walk around a town talking to people, buying and upgrades for your vehicle. And then it goes into basically a car battle game. Again, a really neat game. I don't think it came out on any other system. Also, I want to mention this RPG here called Bocti, I think is how you pronounce it. The sun is in your hand. So that was a really unique RPG in that it used this little sensor that would pop out on the bottom of the handheld, which would detect sunlight, which you would use in the game to help battle the enemies in the game, but also solve light puzzles. And I just thought that was a really neat use of a handheld, right? Because it's portable, so you could go outside and, potentially get some sunlight, and it would help you beat this game. And again, I just thought that was so cool. Many Star Wars games, but the one I want to highlight here, somewhat, again, of a hidden gem, if I dare say, is Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Now, despite what you think of the movie, I think it's just okay. This game's awesome. Basically, it's a side-scrolling brawler, and it is really fun, very well developed, has great graphics. I mean, it's just way better than you would think of your typical movie licensed Star Wars game. And speaking of licensed games, here are some more that are in my collection. And again, what's really interesting is that some of these are way better than you would expect. For instance, a series of unfortunate events. Well, while the movie, I don't think got great reviews, and I certainly never saw it because it seemed like it was going to be kind of pointless or whatever, but the game is actually pretty interesting. As you see here, it is a side-scrolling platform game where you can swap between 3 different characters, and each one of them has their own kind of abilities, and you use those to solve puzzles in the game. As well as The Nightmare Before Christmas, again, another game that, well, okay, obviously the movie is beloved, but who knew that the official licensed game would be actually so cool? As well as Elf. I mean, of course, I love the movie Elf. Don't get me wrong. Actually, I think that's one of my favorite Christmas movies. But if you would ask me, would the game be great on the Game Boy Advance? I'd be like, no. And okay, maybe it's not great, but it is better than you would expect. It's actually a really fun, again, 2D platforming game. And then we have Lilo and Stitch 1 and 2. So actually, I really like the original Lilo and Stitch. I haven't seen any of the sequels, but the first movie is fantastic. But what's great is that the games they're again kind of like Metal Slug. They're run and gun shooters, and they are really well designed. Now I compare it to Metal Slug, but actually they're also more kind of platformer as well. So maybe you would say, Castlevania or something like that. But again, way better than you would ever expect. And I have some more licensed games here. And, that's the thing back then, is that there were just tons and tons and tons of licensed games, both for cartoons, television shows, and movies. I think it's kind of something that people forget about, right? That nowadays you might see an occasional movie tie-in game, but it's nothing like it used to be back then. I mean, back then it just seemed like everything that came out in theaters or on television got its own game. And I'm trying to figure out kind of why that is. I don't know if it was maybe games were cheaper to make. Maybe it was kind of expected. I don't know. And admittedly, a lot of them are terrible. But again, it's really fun to kind of dig into the catalog and try to find those ones that maybe aren't so bad, right? That are a little bit kind of a hidden gem. Another trend I've been seeing in probably the last decade is the release of a bunch of homebrew games, specifically by a company called Pico Interactive. Now, they're not the only one out there, but there has been a lot of games that are either completely brand new and released in physical form for the Game Boy Advance, or in the case of Pico Interactive, sometimes what they do is they'll license a game that maybe didn't come out in North America, or maybe it was even unfinished, and then they'll pay the development time to finish it, and then it'll get a physical release, which again is really fun for us as fans of the handheld and also physical game collectors. Here's a release I picked up at a retro gaming expo years ago that of course is Mother 3, the fan translation. Now, what's interesting about this is that it never officially got a release outside of the US. And I guess the reason for that is because some of the content in here was considered somewhat controversial, because I guess there's instances of drug use and maybe some animal cruelty. So people were kind of afraid to bring it to the US, but fans did. They printed a physical version of it here, and I picked it up, like I said, years ago. And then check this out. So you typically don't think of the Game Boy Advance as being a system that you would be able to play first-person shooters, but there are a few of them on there, and they range in various quality for sure. Obviously, you have the original Doom 2, which actually runs pretty well on it, as well as Wolfenstein 3D. But the one that a lot of people kind of skip, and it's actually more fun than you would think, is X versus Sever. I think that's how you pronounce that. But basically, it's a game that was only released on the Game Boy Advance, and it's based on a movie that I never saw. What's cool about it, again, is that it is a full first-person shooter. It's kind of amazing how well it runs on the Game Boy Advance. Now, of course, it looks a little rough, and you have to keep in mind that if you play it on the original Game Boy Advance screen, technically, it's impressive. And then another game that I think a lot of people didn't expect to see on the Game Boy Advance, at least in the form that it showed up, is Killswitch, which is a game that I really like this game. I believe I played it either on the PlayStation 2 or the original Xbox. It is a cover-based third-person shooter, and you see that it is running on the Game Boy Advance here. Again, keep in mind, I know it's kind of rough, and it is, but again, it's pretty cool that they were able to even pull it off at all, right? And the reason why I have so many of these games that push the Game Boy Advance hardware is because several years ago, I got interested in taking a look at some of these games that, again, pushed it in places that, most of us didn't really expect. And I wanted to do a video for my YouTube channel, so that's why I hunted them down and got them for my collection, was to do that video. So if you're interested in kind of a deeper dive into that, I'll put a link down, or I guess probably up in the corner. Here are 4 more games I think are very good on the Game Boy Advance, but I want to start off by highlighting Astro Boy Omega Factor. So this is a game that was developed by Treasure, which has a long history of doing just really creative and interesting and fun games, and this is certainly no exception. And probably first glance, this game looks like your typical kind of platforming beat-em-up game, and it is a beat-em-up game. However, it is its own thing. I mean, it is unlike any other beat 'em up I've ever played. And it's primarily because you just have so many ways to do combos in this game. There are a ton of ways to just do massive destruction in this game, and it just gets crazy and over the top right out of the bat. This game does not hold back. It's just awesome all the way. And then we have Klonoa 2, which is a really great entry into this franchise. I'm a big fan of the Klonoa games in general, and it's great that the Game Boy Advance got such a cool version of it here. Some more random games here, and all 3 of these are very good, actually. But again, I want to highlight Super Monkey Ball Jr., which is a game that Reggie told me about. I had no idea that this is actually a pretty faithful version of the Monkey Ball franchise on the Game Boy Advance. And as you can see here, it's a full 3D game. And I think it's interesting that they chose to do this as opposed to going to something like, Marble Madness back in the day. They could have totally did that where it was isometric, but instead they decided to push the hardware and, actually they pull it off. I mean, the only downside is that the frame rate is not great. It's pushing the hardware. It's nowhere near 60 frames a second, but it is definitely playable. Now, I did mention that I have some complete in-box games, and the ones that you see here are actually my very few sealed games. These are games that I, for whatever reason, came into my collection and have never been opened. Now, the reason why I want to mention that, though, is because something that I'm starting to see, and maybe you've seen this in your game collection as well, is that over time, it seems like the plastic on there is slowly squeezing some of these boxes. I'm not sure why that happens. Maybe it's due to heat or something like that. But part of me thinks that maybe I should open these and just so it doesn't ruin the boxes. I don't know. I'd love to know what you guys think. Now, I mentioned that the Game Boy Advance has a lot of genres represented on there, but I think that one genre that isn't well represented on the handheld is the arcade shooter. Now, I have 2 of them here, and both of these games are very good, and they also push the hardware in really cool ways. Like, these games look fantastic on the GBA. But other than some shooters that might show up in, say, some arcade collections, just doesn't seem like there's very many out there. Maybe it has something to do with the screen. Maybe the screen is a little bit too small to kind of do that justice, but I don't know. I mean, obviously, if I'm missing some, please let me know in the comments. Some more games I enjoy playing, including Rebel Star. So that is a turn-based tactics game. I guess you could probably compare it to something like, say, XCOM, things like that. As well as Drill Dozer, which is a really cool platforming game, something that I've never quite played since. And what's cool about this game is that it has built-in rumble into its cartridge, so that's why it looks that way. As well as Wing Commander Prophecy. Again, another game that you'd be like, okay, how are they going to possibly make this epic space combat simulator work on this handheld? But they pull it off. Actually, this is a pretty decent game. And so as you guys see, there's just so much variety available on the Game Boy Advance. I mean, honestly, for a long time, it was my favorite handheld. There is just so much that you can play on the system. There's so much to discover on here. There's, like I said, there's every genre. There's everything on here. It's amazing. You have old games, you have new games, you have simple games, you have complex games. It's quite an amazing system. And it's super fun to collect for, especially, like I said, when there's over 1,500 games to go out there and explore. And now that we have the Analog Pocket, which is an amazing device that allows you to experience these in probably the best way possible, it just seems like now is the time to dive in and take a look at this, especially if you are unfamiliar with it, or maybe you haven't looked at it in a while and you're just looking for something new to play. And so as you can tell, I am a lifelong Game Boy Advance fan and really love this collection. But of course, with so many games out there, I know I'm missing many more in the collection. Please let me know in the comments some games you think I should be picking up. And as always, guys, I want to thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.